everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon and coming along to our inaugural lecture of our agenda setting lecture series. Those of you who are from the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences will know that this series is envisioned as bringing together a diverse group of scholars, of students, of practitioners, of external stakeholders, and members of the public to discuss the pressing issues of the day. We want to explore the questions shaping current debates, offer fresh perspectives, and provide a space for thoughtful discussion, while also contributing to the vital research culture here, a vital and vibrant research culture here at UL. And given these aims, and given the faculty's recent introduction of 4 key research funding themes, one of which is AI and digital humanities, and of course, given how hot a topic AI seems to be everywhere today, the questions surrounding artificial intelligence and its uses seem a very good place to start our agenda setting lecture series. And I'm absolutely delighted that we have Professor Mirjam Hauck of the Open University with us today to share her insights on AI literacy for social inclusion. I'm also delighted that we have our Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, Dr. Sandra Joyce, and the Provost and Vice President of the University, Professor Anne Ledwith, here today. They're both going to say a few words momentarily, but first I want to say a few important thank yous. I want to thank them for their support this evening. I'm also very grateful to Una Grace, who's kind of hiding in the back there, but without whose efforts we would not be here tonight. Thanks also to our fantastic co-op student, Isabella Gandolfo, who's provided assistance in a multitude of ways for this evening. And thanks, of course, also to Professor Liam Murray, through whose connections we came to invite Professor Hauck this evening. There will be time for questions following Professor Hauck's lecture with a couple of roaming mics available. If you have a question, please raise your hand and let someone with a mic get to you so that you can, and speak into the mic so that everybody can hear. We are recording this lecture, so we want to make sure everything is audible. And I'm going to finish in my best air steward mode and point out all of the exits. There are 2 behind you at the back. 2 behind you down at the bottom, and then there's another one in the back here. Just take note of these, just in case you need them over the course of the lecture. Otherwise, thank you once again for coming this evening, and I'll hand over to Dr. Sandra Joyce, our Executive Dean.
Thank you so much, Tina. I was a bit afraid you wouldn't be able to see me over this monitor. So a chóirde fáilte roimh hig ollscoil limní, agus hig dóibh crinne éireann ciúil agus rinke inniu. Colleagues, friends and visitors to UL, really delighted to have you here today and welcome you on this beautiful evening to the University of Limerick and the beautiful surrounds of the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance. And it's a special pleasure because this is a very important event for us, and I do believe that an agenda-setting lecture such as this is really vital for a faculty and a university because it does help us to hone and articulate a shared vision. It helps to align diverse disciplines around common priorities, and it also provides the intellectual momentum that helps to shape the strategic direction and future research culture, certainly of our faculty. So, Mirjam, you are exceptionally welcome for that regard. I wanted to take the opportunity to just briefly talk about the diversity of research we have at AHSS, so I hope you'll indulge me in this. At AHSS in UL, we have a wonderful diversity of research, and one of the defining strengths of our faculty is that there is no single way to generate knowledge. There's no single methodology, and there's certainly no single form of impact. Our faculty members embody a rich ecosystem of disciplinary traditions, of creative practices, and public-facing contributions that together reflect the complexity of the world that I think we're all seeking to understand, and for me, no more than the current situation that we're in. Our recent AHSS disciplinary research norms document, led by Professor Tina Moran, we have just recently revised that, and Tina has been instrumental, the main driver of that. This really helps to make the diversity of our research culture visible. It highlights what many of us already know from working across the faculty, that research here spans an exceptionally wide spectrum, from peer-reviewed monographs, journal articles, scholarly editions, performances, compositions, policy reports, translations, I'm going to keep going, digital data sets, exhibitions, creative writing, and more. And forgive me to those colleagues who are here that I've maybe missed out on the contributions you make. But I believe that this breadth is not a challenge that we have to manage, because sometimes it is regarded as a bit of a challenge. How do we recognise all this research? I don't think it's a challenge that we have to manage. I think it's something, a core strength really, that we have to celebrate as a faculty and that we have to keep advocating for. I was going to mention the different types of research that are coming out of the various units, but I think I'll suffice to say that most of our research is it's all grounded in global intercultural perspectives, and it's validated through discipline-appropriate forms of peer review. So that's really important to us as well. So those who are involved in shaping public policy or legislative reform, professional practice, multilingual scholarship, pedagogical innovation, translation studies, advancing disciplinary knowledge, collaborating with governments and NGOs and civil society to address pressing societal challenges. This is just some of what we do, and I'm so proud of all our colleagues for what they do in this area. And Tina referenced the 4 research funding themes that we've established at the faculty, and they're really important to us, and not least AI and digital humanities that's referenced in our lecture today. So these examples really demonstrate that AHSS research is not confined to a single model of excellence, but that excellence is expressed through disciplinary integrity and methodological pluralism and impact that can be scholarly, artistic, civic, community-based, and more. And that diversity really matters to us because it enables our faculty to speak to the big issues of our time. Things like cultural change, technological disruption, conflict, democracy, social cohesion, environmental sustainability, and the role of creativity in human flourishing. And this aligns so closely with UL's commitments, again, led by Professor Moran, through COARA and DORA and the National Open Research Forum to value a broader understanding of research quality, to use metrics responsibly, and to recognise contributions that traditional systems often overlook. And I suppose the last point I'll make on this, I'm so sorry I'm hitting something here. Sorry. This is typical of me now when I get near any kind of technology. I suppose just to make the point, lastly, that our diversity in AHSS really strengthens research at UL as a whole, and we bring critical insight and cultural depth, ethical reflection, creativity and public engagement to the university's research identity. And these are the capacities that society, I strongly believe, and I hope you share that belief, society urgently needs these. They're the ones that I believe the future will depend on. So I want to recognise my colleagues today at AHSS for the work that they do, the books and articles, the performances and exhibitions, the policy engagements, the data sets, the translations, the broadcasts, and the community partnerships that they engage in, because each of these contributes to a vibrant, outward-looking faculty whose research is impactful, innovative, and deeply connected to the world. And in this regard, I'm particularly delighted that we are here this evening for Mirjam's agenda-setting lecture. So I want to extend now a very special thanks to Professor Tina Moran, our Assistant Dean Research, because she's thanked everybody else except herself. But she has reinitiated this series, and we are really grateful to her for that. And she's worked very hard to make this happen. So please show your appreciation for Tina. And I'm very happy now to hand over to our wonderful Provost and Deputy President, who's going to introduce our speaker this evening, Professor Anne Ledwith. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everybody. And Tina, can I echo that? I think it's great to see this series starting, and it's fantastic, the topic that you've picked for the first lecture in the series. Because as we know, AI is having a significant impact on all of our lives. And whether we're using it for applying for promotions, for writing wedding speeches, for diagnosing all of our minor ailments, or for completing our PhDs, everybody is using AI. And I think it's something that we need to think about, and that's why today's lecture is so welcome. I'm personally very negative about AI. I'm afraid that it's undermining truth, it's supporting bigotry and online hatred. Fundamentally, it's going to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. It's about taking the creativity of artists, screenwriters, authors, and using them to make other people rich. I think AI will make us intellectually lazy. It's going to inhibit learning. It's going to increase senility in older people as they switch off their brains earlier than they should do. We've seen the US government dump Anthropic for Sam Altman's OpenAI because Anthropic wanted to guarantee that its technology would not be used for autonomous lethal weapons. We've seen Sam Altman argue that we shouldn't worry about the energy consumed by AI because to have a human make create or perform a similar function would take at least 20 years of having to feed them and educate them and keep them warm. So of course AI is better. And think about the mindset that is behind that. I think AI is going to limit creativity and individualism. Governments are now trying to ban social media for under 16-year-olds. And now I'm doing what she was doing, am I? There's a box here. I wonder. Okay, it stopped. Yeah, I don't, anyway, we have a box, we have technology. But will we be having a similar conversation in 5 years or 10 years about why did we allow this to have the impact that it's having on our society, and what can we do to reverse it? But, and this is a big but, we said the same thing about the printing press and the radio and the television. I think this is a conversation that we need to have, and we need to be looking at both sides of where that conversation is going. AI is here, it's going to have a significant impact on our students, and we do need to think about how they use it, when they use it, and when they don't use it. Here at UL, we've just launched an AI task force, and I see Martin Cunneen, or at least I saw Martin Cunneen in the audience. There you go, Martin, and Mary Claire Kennedy, who have done a huge amount of work at UL in terms of grappling with how we deal with AI and the impact it's going to have on the education of our students. The HEA has published recent reports about AI in higher education, a policy framework and a sectoral perspective. And they've identified a number of themes. Within the sectoral perspective, they have identified that the sector is uncoordinated. We need to re-examine our educational purpose. We need assessment reform, which I think we're all very aware of. Students and staff need support. We need holistic governance and infrastructure, and leadership needs to shape this, to shape where we're going with AI. And that inclusion requires deliberate action. So I think it's that deliberate action that I'm hoping we are going to hear about today. AI can offer possibilities of inclusion. Students with disabilities, neurodivergence, or language needs can benefit from AI tools as long as they're clear, supported, and the use is ethical. But we also need to be aware of the possibilities of exclusion. There are growing gaps in digital literacy and access, and I think that's something hopefully that we will hear addressed. Inclusion will have to be proactively designed, and we need to be constantly vigilant of the need for inclusion and for social justice. So I'm delighted that we have here today Professor Mirjam Hauck, and she is going to talk to us, as you've probably all seen her slides anyway. But she is going to talk to us about AI literacy for social inclusion and why it does matter, and I think it absolutely does matter. Mirjam is a professor of critical digital pedagogies in the Faculty of Wellbeing Education and Language Studies at the Open University in the UK. She is also a university academic lead for AI in learning, teaching and assessment. Her scholarly work focuses on theorising the field of collaborative online international learning and virtual exchange through a social justice and inclusion lens. And this is framed as critical Critical Collaborative Online International Learning and Virtual Exchange, or CVE, as she calls it, much more simply. Most recently, she's been exploring the potential of CVE to develop students' critical AI literacy skills. She's the president of the European Association for Computer-Assisted Language Learning, Eurocall, and serves as associate editor of the Call Journal and is an editorial board member of Recall and LLT. She is a founding member of the UNI collaboration.org. So I'm delighted to welcome her to the stage, and hopefully she will convince me that there is some good in AI. It's all yours, Mirjam.
What can I say? Thank you. I'm humbled, I'm honored, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks for having me, as they say. I want to begin somewhere personal and somewhere uncomfortable. I am obviously a white female academic. I work at one of the UK's largest universities in a senior leadership role. I publish, I present at conferences, I sit on committees where green papers become white papers and where decisions are made for the entire institution. So by most measures, I occupy a position of considerable institutional privilege. And that privilege shapes what I see, what I miss, and whose experiences I am most at risk of speaking over. And I'm not saying this as a ritual disclaimer, the kind of positionality statement that one just so throws in before the real talk begins. I say this because it is directly relevant to everything I'm going to argue here tonight. Because this talk is about who AI serves and who it leaves behind, about whose knowledge is encoded in these systems and whose is erased, about the difference between developing AI literacy as an individual skill and developing it as a collective, justice-oriented practice. And I cannot make that argument honestly without acknowledging that I'm not a neutral speaker. None of us are, actually. But what I can do, and what I will try to do, is to remain accountable to that position, to share AI literacy frameworks that bring the margins to the center rather than the mainstream, and to learn from and be open to being changed by perspectives and traditions that my own education did not give me. Now, Ubuntu philosophy, the understanding that I am because of you, that my well-being is inseparable from yours, and that I cannot thrive without you, has been one of the most important intellectual and ethical resources for my work recently. Of course, Ubuntu philosophy is not mine by heritage, but it has become foundational to how I think about education, how I think about technology, about AI, and about what it means to be in relation with others, with you. I offer this philosophy today in that spirit, so not as an appropriation, but as a genuine debt, and with gratitude. Now, some of you may have come here today feeling that AI is fundamentally not your problem, that it belongs to computer science departments, to tech companies, to government policy, or somewhere else altogether. And perhaps more than that, that it represents a kind of encroachment on what education in the arts, humanities, and social sciences is actually for. If that is something you are thinking, I do not want to argue you out of it. it is where I want to start. Because the instinct that says something important is at risk here is not technophobia, it is not naivety. It is a serious intellectual and ethical response. And it is exactly the kind of response that the conversation about AI needs more of, not less. The disciplines represented in this faculty have spent decades, in many cases centuries, developing tools for asking hard questions about power and knowledge. Who gets to speak with authority? Whose experiences are rendered invisible in dominant narratives? What is lost in the act of categorization? What does it mean to claim objectivity? All of these are not peripheral questions. They are foundational ones, and this faculty is ideally placed to address them. And here is what I want to argue tonight. Those questions are precisely what AI literacy requires, not as an afterthought, not as a values supplement to the real technical work, but as its core. When AI systems are trained on text, they inherit biases, the absences, the power relations encoded in those texts. When it generates language, it does so through patterns that are learned from a particular slice of human expression, one that is, as we all know, disproportionately Anglophone, Western, and drawn from dominant cultural production. When it is deployed in educational settings, it shapes who succeeds, whose writing is valued, and whose ways of knowing are legible to the machine. These are not technical problems with technical solutions. They are political, ethical, and epistemological problems. And they are problems that this faculty, let me say it again, is unusually well equipped to address. So tonight I want to make a case not for AI and not against it, but for what it would mean to engage with it critically, ethically, and in the spirit of social justice and inclusion. I want to make a case for why that engagement matters for your students, your disciplines, and for the communities beyond this institution whose lives are shaped by systems they were never asked about. And I want to do that by drawing on a framework we have been developing at the Open University, a framework for critical AI literacy skills development, and by drawing on Ubuntu philosophy, the understanding that I am because of you, that I cannot thrive while you are left behind, and that your well-being is the condition of my own. That the question who benefits from a technology, who benefits from AI, is inseparable from the question of who we are to one another. You ready? Let's get started. AI is already here in this city, this faculty, this room. So I will resist the temptation to start with Silicon Valley or with predictions about the future. Let me start here instead. AI is already shaping how students at this university, in this room, write and research, whether they acknowledge it or not. It is shaping how community organizations in Limerick access social services, how job applications are being screened, how creditworthiness is assessed, and how healthcare resources are being allocated. It is present in the tools your students use every day. It is embedded in the platforms and systems your institution runs on, and it is increasingly central to the policy decisions that govern all of our lives. And it is here in this faculty too, in ways that are genuinely exciting, but also challenging. The Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences here at UL has recently identified AI and digital humanities as a research priority. And I think that this is one of the most important things humanities faculty can do right now. Because the questions digital humanities is positioned to ask about AI are not being asked loudly enough anywhere else. What happens when AI is used to reconstruct voices from fragmentary historical archives? Who decides which silences get filled and in whose image? What does it mean when a language model analyzes patterns across centuries of literature, trained overwhelmingly on canonical Anglophone texts? What gets seen? What remains invisible? What are the implications of deploying AI translation tools on endangered language corpora? Who owns that data? Who benefits from its processing? And what is lost in the translation of living language into a training set? These are not hypothetical concerns for a distant future. They are happening now. And they demand exactly the combination of technological engagement and humanistic critique that the digital humanities at its best make possible. And this is why I'm going to argue that AI is not someone else's problem. It is, in a very specific sense, this faculty's problem. But it is also an opportunity for this faculty. Now, when most institutions talk about AI literacy, they mean something that is relatively straightforward. Can you use the tools? Can you write an effective prompt? Can you integrate AI into your workflow in an efficient way? And these are, of course, not unimportant skills, but they are radically insufficient as a response to the scale of what is at stake here. So teaching someone to use an AI tool fluently without teaching them to question it is a bit like teaching someone to use a search engine without ever mentioning that search results are ranked by algorithms that are shaped by commercial interests, that the sources at the top are not necessarily the ones that are most reliable, and that the very act of searching leaves a data trail that is being monetized. But the tool works, the person is more efficient, and the deeper questions go entirely unasked. Now, at the Open University, we have been developing a framework that takes a very different starting point. The Critical AI Literacy Framework for developing critical AI literacy skills. It asks not just whether learners can use AI and how they use it, but whether they can use it well. And in this particular framework, using it well means applying the lens of equality, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility to every single interaction with these systems. The framework was developed by a group of people, colleagues from the library, colleagues from careers and employability, our learning design team for generative AI, and by the academic leads for AI in learning, teaching, and assessment. It organizes critical AI literacy into 6 dimensions: AI concepts and applications, so understanding not just what AI is, but how different tools work. what their potentials and limitations are, and how to assess their robustness and reliability. Learning and teaching with AI, moving beyond input-output thinking towards iterative, reflective engagement that complements rather than replaces learning. AI creativity, generating ideas and solving problems using AI in inclusive way, explicitly inclusive ways, using repeated prompting across different tools to surface and challenge cultural bias, for example. AI ethics, using and evaluating AI responsibly with attention to copyright, data privacy, and the long-term impacts on society. Which brings us to AI in society, considering the environmental and social consequences of AI, including the exploitation of labor in the global south in the data cleaning centers and the widening, ever-widening digital divide. And finally, AI careers, which is about exploring how AI is reshaping disciplines and job sectors while foregrounding the human skills like creativity, empathy, curiosity, conflict transformation, critical judgment that will remain irreplaceable. What holds all these 6 dimensions together is the insistence that every interaction with AI be evaluated through questions of equality, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. Not like a box-ticking exercise, but as a genuine ethical and intellectual practice, and as a practice of human care. In this framework, literacy is not something you possess. It is something you do. It is a social practice. It is context-specific. It is iterative. It is relational. It requires, as one of our key references in the framework puts it, a self-reflective mindset, an ongoing willingness to ask not just, am I using this well, but what is it doing, to whom, and at what cost? Now, this framework draws on a tradition that this room knows well, critical digital literacy, which has long understood the digital spaces as something that is not neutral. Digital spaces that encode power, that shape identities, that privilege certain voices and marginalize others. But also critical digital literacy as something that equips individuals with tools and strategies to analyze both the linguistic and the non-linguistic features of digital media and helps them identify embedded biases and assumptions. And critical AI literacy extends that tradition of critical digital literacy into the specific territory of large language models and generative AI, asking how these systems contribute to what philosophers call epistemic injustice, which is the undermining of an individual's ability to participate fully in knowledge sharing and decision-making. That is a concept this room will be familiar with, and it is precisely the concept that should be driving our institutional response to AI. Being AI literate in this critical sense means that we have the tools and strategies to critically evaluate AI-generated outputs using EDIA principles and being able to engage in equitable and inclusive prompting as and when required and appropriate. I want to pause here and say something that I think is often left unsaid in conversations about AI in higher education. The arts, humanities, and social sciences are not late to the AI conversation. They've actually been having the foundational version of this conversation for decades. What does it mean to treat a text as authoritative? Literary studies have been asking that since the death of the author. Whose voices are absent from the archive? Historians and post-colonial scholars have been asking that for as long as there have been archives. What is erased in the act of categorization? Sociologists, anthropologists have made careers of that question. How does language shape what we are able to think? Linguists, discourse analysts, and philosophers of language have entire subfields that are devoted to addressing this question. What does it mean to claim objectivity, and who benefits from that claim? Feminist epistemologists have been answering that question with precision and rigor for over half a century. Every single one of these questions is directly, urgently relevant to how AI systems are built, how they are deployed, and how they are being evaluated. The large language model that has never been challenged whether its training data is representative. The image generator that defaults to particular faces and bodies when prompted without specification. The automated feedback tool that rewards certain prose styles, certain rhythms of argument, certain kinds of epistemic confidence, and marginalizes, if not penalizes, others, alternatives. So all of this is not a technological glitch. These are epistemological failures. And the humanities have the means to identify and to name them. What is needed now is for that vocabulary to be brought together, to be brought in direct dialogue with AI systems and the communities that are affected by them. And it's not meant as a critique from the sidelines. It is rather meant to be a proactive participation in how these technologies are being understood, how they are being challenged, and if possible, how they are being transformed. And the faculty's investment in AI and digital humanities is, I would say, precisely that. It is a claim that humanistic inquiry is not supplementary to the AI conversation, but central to it. That the questions of meaning, of power, of representation, and justice that this faculty asks are not just a decorative addition to a primarily technical enterprise. They are what makes the enterprise worth engaging with. I want to return now to Ubuntu and to move it from my opening thought to an ethical framework that I think has a central role to play in this conversation. The dominant narrative around AI adoption in education and in workplaces is relentlessly individualistic. How can I use this tool more effectively? How can my institution gain competitive advantage? How can I future-proof my career? Even the language of AI literacy, if we are not being careful, can slip into this register, like another individual competency to be mastered, another box on the personal development checklist to be ticked. But Ubuntu asks a different question altogether. Not what can I do with this, but what does this do to us, to our relationships, to our communities, to our shared sense of responsibility to one another's well-being. Not how do I get ahead, but who is being left behind, and what is my responsibility towards them. And you cannot cast aside this as a sentiment. It is a serious ethical and political requirement, because the evidence on who is being left behind by AI is anything but ambiguous. The workers in the global south, who are paid poverty wages to label data and to review harmful content so that AI systems can function. Labor that is largely invisible and never gets mentioned in the glossy narrative of the technological companies and their progress. The communities whose languages are too small, too under-resourced, and too recently colonized to appear in the training data in any meaningful way. The students from widening participation backgrounds who are navigating AI-saturated educational environments without the cultural capital to understand what these systems are doing or how to interrogate their outputs. And the people with disabilities whose accessibility needs are kind of an afterthought in the design of most AI interfaces, if they're being considered at all to begin with. Now, the Open University's Responsible by Design framework, which I'll come to in a moment, identifies 4 ethical pillars that a responsible engagement with AI must address: encoded bias, environmental impact, exploitation, and the digital divide. And each of these is at its root a question about who bears the costs of AI and who captures the benefits. And the answer consistently is that costs and benefits are distributed along existing fault lines of inequality, unless someone actively and deliberately works to make it otherwise, to change this. And Ubuntu insists that this someone has to be us. In educational terms, this means designing AI literacy experiences that do not assume that everyone starts from the same place, and that hold space for skepticism, for anxiety, for refusal as legitimate responses. Literacy, AI literacy experiences that foreground the experiences of learners who are most at risk from unreflective AI adoption, rather than optimizing for those who are already well positioned to benefit from AI. And designing AI literacy experiences that treat the development of AI competencies not as an individual achievement, but as a shared, collective, ongoing practice of care. Now, I want to focus a bit more on one dimension of the justice argument that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets. AI systems are trained on data. The data is not neutral. It is produced by people in contexts with purposes, and those people and contexts and purposes are profoundly unequally distributed. The large language models that underpin most generative AI tools have been trained predominantly on texts produced in English by writers operating within Western academic, cultural, and commercial traditions. And as I've already mentioned, this is not a minor technical detail. It means that these systems encode a particular set of assumptions about what knowledge looks like, what good writing sounds like, what a coherent argument is, what counts as evidence, and whose ways of knowing are valued and legible. And when those systems are then deployed globally, in educational institutions, in hiring processes, in content generation, in automated assessment, they carry those assumptions with them and right across. They reward certain kinds of knowledge production and penalize others. They make some voices more legible and some less. They automate at scale a set of epistemic hierarchies that many of us in this room have spent a considerable amount of time trying to dismantle. And this is why decolonial approaches to AI literacy, they are not a niche concern for specialists in post-colonial studies. They are central to the integrity of the entire enterprise. If our AI strategies do not actively address the ways in which these systems reproduce and amplify colonial knowledge hierarchies, then we are not developing AI literacy. What we are developing are more efficient ways of perpetuating epistemic injustice. And in my own work, through the CVE in AI project, for example, where we work with colleagues from the African continent, but also through Global South to Global South collaborative models in virtual exchange, I have seen what it looks like when this challenge is taken seriously. When the design of educational technology begins from the margins rather than mainstream. When the question of whose knowledge counts is asked before the tool is built or at least chosen, rather than being asked afterwards. And the results are different. They're not just more equitable, but they are richer, they're more interesting, and they're more generative for everyone. That is the kind of AI engagement I would like to advocate for tonight. And it is the kind of AI engagement that a faculty with your commitments and intellectual resources is ideally positioned to model. Now, what exactly does all of this mean for the different people in this room, for you? For students, you are not passive recipients of AI systems, and you are not simply being asked to become more efficient users of tools designed elsewhere, and for purposes that might actually not be yours. Critical AI literacy is about developing the analytical agency to evaluate what these systems are doing, to recognize their limitations and their biases, and to actively, intentionally, to advocate for AI environments that serve your learning and your communities. Those are transferable and very powerful capacities, and they are ones that your education in the humanities and social sciences has already begun to develop. For staff, the decisions you make about how to design curricula, how to respond to AI-generated work, and how to talk about AI with your students are not neutral. They shape the kind of learners you produce and the kind of relationship those learners have with technology and with one another. And this is where I would like to briefly introduce a second framework from the OU that I hope you will find useful in this work going forward. The Responsible by Design framework was developed by our learning design team under the leadership of my colleague Eleanor Moore. The framework is rooted in student voice, and it is aligned with our institutional strategy. It identifies 4 ethical pillars that educators are asked to consider whenever they are designing activities involving generative AI and involving the intentional development of critical AI literacy skills. Now, I've already mentioned them, I'm going to repeat them briefly. The first pillar is encoded bias. Are your students supported to consider the normative predictions that are built into AI models and how they mirror, reproduce, and sometimes exacerbate stereotypes of gender, ethnicity, and culture? The second pillar is the one on environmental impact. Are your students being made aware of the significant carbon and energy costs of generative AI, and are they being guided to use these tools mindfully? The third one is exploitation. Are your students engaging with the reality that many AI models have been built on unpaid labor from the Global South? and on copyrighted material that is used without permission. And the fourth one is the digital divide. Are we as educators, are we designing AI activities in ways that acknowledge that not all students have equal access to these tools, equal confidence in using them, or equal cultural preparation for navigating and questioning their outputs? Very importantly, that framework also insists on the right to opt out. So if we are designing activities that involve generative AI, that want to develop our students' critical AI literacy skills development, we should always offer an alternative. And we should be able to articulate clearly why we are asking students to use these tools in the first place. Now, coming briefly back on what this means for institutions, and I include UL in this. AI strategies that focus on efficiency rather than equity will reproduce existing inequalities. We've mentioned it. Now, the decision to invest in AI in digital humanities as a research theme is a very significant one, and it carries a huge responsibility for you to ensure that the humanistic and critical values that make this faculty distinctive, these are not marginal voices in the conversation about how AI is adopted and used here at UL. But that these values, your values, are shaping forces in that conversation. Now you have invited me to give an agenda-setting lecture. But I'm of course not here to offer a finished program or a set of solved problems. I'm here to argue that certain questions deserve to be at the center of how this faculty and how this university and also this city engage with AI, and to invite you into the work of answering, of addressing these questions. And those questions are at their core actually amazingly simple. Who benefits? Who is left behind? Whose knowledge counts? Who was consulted? Who was left out? And who bears the cost? They are the questions that good humanities scholarship has always asked of power. And they are the questions that AI, more than almost any technology before it, needs to be asked of, urgently and persistently. The critical AI literacy framework and the responsible by design framework that I've introduced tonight can hopefully be of help, but they also do not give any final answers. They are living documents, and they are better for every voice that engages critically with them, challenges them, and brings perspectives that have not yet been accounted for in those frameworks. So I would invite you to feedback from your engagement with them. Now, if tonight's conversation contributes anything to the agenda that this faculty is beginning to build around AI and digital humanities, I hope that it is this. That the most important thing you can do is not to adopt AI faster or more efficiently or more comprehensively than your peers, but that you should adopt it more justly. And to ask before every implementation decision what this does to the communities you serve, and to be willing to hear and to engage with the answer or with the answers even when they are uncomfortable. What would it look like if the communities who are most at risk from AI, rather than those who are currently best positioned to profit from it, what would it look like if they were the ones setting the agenda for how AI develops and is being integrated in education and beyond? That is the question that I think this faculty, this university and also this city are well placed to help answer. And I'm curious to hear what you think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirjam, for that wonderful, inspiring lecture. I'm really taken by this idea of AI literacy as a social practice of care. I'm sure there's quite a lot of, I'm sure, quite a lot of questions in the audience. So we have roving mics. So if you just raise your hand and somebody will come down to you. Does anybody want to start us off?
There is a colleague here.
Oh, sorry, Tatiana, down at the front.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm interested in the aspect of different languages, for example, because in some areas, if you come from a different culture and different legislation, different system, you can basically bring also different perspectives. For example, universities in Germany, in Italy, in France are organized in a very different way than in the UK / Commonwealth, let's say, nations. So is there some kind of policy now at Open University or some kind of guidelines that you can give? For example, okay, how many languages should you consider? Where could you look if it is not just the English-speaking world? Which other alternative search engines or AIs that are covering more languages or whatever could be considered? I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm more interested in the guidelines. You know.
We do not have we certainly don't have policy to that effect, because that was your question first. But as we are working in the regions and nations, in the 4 regions and nations, we do have very strong guidelines in terms of not just the acknowledging, but also the fostering and the use of the indigenous languages. Yeah? And we are trying to expand this to heritage languages in the regions and nations, in England in particular, because we also have such a huge mix of representation on our campus. It's global. The world is represented on our campus in terms of staff. Yes, we have a push in that direction, and in that context, I'm personally particularly interested in not just the acknowledgement, but also in the promotion of British Sign Language, which is, after all, an official language in the UK. And hardly anybody in any higher education institution is walking the talk. Having said that, again, AI brings huge advantages in terms of using this technology to teach British Sign Language at a distance. So in that sense, AI is very, very relevant for us, and definitely an inclusion instrument. I hope that addresses your question. Thank you. I don't know, can I just ask what is sign language an official language here as well in Ireland? Yeah? Okay. Do you feel that this is being honored across the higher education sector? Yeah. So it is definitely worth exploring what AI brings to the table in terms of making this happen.
Thank you. So I'm head of academic integrity for the university. I was very heartened about your observation about not focusing on detection, but on critical use and critical engagement. So thank you for pointing that out. That's very helpful for my work. But rather, I'd like to focus on thinking about, I suppose, the juggernaut that is AI use and its applications within things like the medical sphere for diagnostics. And also, I suppose, thinking about the competitive world of research grants and progression, I suppose, in the research environment, particularly within the hard sciences. And I suppose there is a concern that a kind of a conscientious resistance or thoughtful use of AI will leave us left behind, perhaps, in that competitive environment, or perhaps not monopolizing on the potential advantages or affordances of the technology, will mean that, I suppose, we are not progressing as we may well do to optimize patient care, for example. And so I can understand that there is perhaps a tension between our desire to progress as a human race versus, I suppose, conscientious use of a technology.
There is. And I don't have the answer of how we are going to deal with this, but we need to acknowledge the tension and the fundamental questions I've introduced tonight. They are not less relevant because of the commercial interests. And what I'm saying is that we are in the humanities need to make sure that the balance, that there is a balanced approach between that race for efficiency and all the ethical considerations and care considerations. I have no answer. I just think that we are better placed than anybody else to make sure that there is a balanced approach in that space. Sorry, yeah, no.
In one sense, I suppose a follow-on question to a certain extent, and in another kind of a methodological question, really, related to critique, right? So I'm massively sympathetic to what you're saying in one sense, but to kind of step back for 2 seconds, and in one sense, what you were kind of presenting as a critical AI literacy in one sense, and this is just an observation in one sense, but what it looked and kind of reminded me of an awful lot of just political critique that that we've been hearing, like, and it's legitimate, absolutely. I'm a critical theorist by background, right? So I have no issue with it whatsoever. But you will, I mean, the standard responses to all of that stuff, like when you're talking about care, when you're talking about decoloniality, when you're talking about, as I said, I'm absolutely on board, but from a skeptical point, there's always the crisis of critique, the idea of ethical and epistemological authoritarianism. From where are you launching this? And all of those are kind of Pandora's boxes, right? They're all really interesting, and we can get bogged down in those if we want from a discursive point of view. But I suppose my question is, rather than doing a political critique of AI, is there a need, specifically from within the arts and humanities, to kind of develop a critique of AI itself first? Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, and the answer is yes. Just a bit of a clarification. When I come from an institution where over a third of the learners come from what we call a widening participation background. Yeah? Hence, there was an urgency to come up with the framework for critical AI literacy skills development that is grounded in equity, diversity, inclusion, and access principles. So, and this is, critical is very often used in a different way, like you just said. But my critical is EDIA informed. Yeah? Of course, that is also political. Yeah? But this is maybe that a slightly different approach to critical than you have practiced, or that you could also see in my presentation, as you acknowledged. Yeah. The political, socio-political, socio-economical criticism. Yes, yeah. They're not mutually exclusive, though.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Mirjam. Thanks very much for that wonderful talk. Very stimulating, very stimulating. I didn't overhype you. I'm sure everyone will acknowledge that, you know. I was just reading yesterday that the oldest and most powerful emotion that we have is fear. And the greatest fear that we have is of the unknown. Our provost herself just asked the question there, well, what sort of conversation will we be having in 5 years' time? Fueled nowadays, exacerbated by these types of alarmist headlines that we're constantly reading about the death of jobs, universal payment schemes. Currently, how do you see the situation? Are you more positive or less positive? More optimistic or less?
I took a conscious decision of, like when I started my engagement with Ubuntu philosophy, round about that time, maybe a bit earlier actually, I took a conscious decision that was around a certain birthday, I'm not going to mention the age. that I'm not going to do anything in my life anymore that is motivated by fear. And that I only want to do work, professional work, but also private work, that is socio-politically relevant. And AI has handed it to me on a plate. And this is how I'm dealing with it. Without fear and socio-politically motivated. A social practice of care. Now you have to decide for yourself how you are going to tackle it.
I have a slightly different question. I'm a literary historian by background, and what I'm particularly interested in, and I love how you drew these kind of parallels with the archive and the silences of the archives, the books that we no longer read, and yet were in their day extremely popular and widely read. So who has shaped those narratives? Who has shaped the canon? And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you see AI and AI literacy kind of shaping our disciplines going forward, particularly in the arts, humanities, and social sciences.
To me, one of the ways of using generative AI in particular that is kind of not on people's radar, I think, currently, is to interrogate itself, like you said, challenging AI itself. And this is a kind of very, very insightful dialogue that you could have with Claude, for example. Asking that exact question, and then see what happens. Do I agree with? Yeah. Does that ring alarm bells? And you can probe and prompt for this kind of intellectual exchange, but this is not really happening yet. And at the moment, there will come a point where it will either give up on you, or you will realize that my own way of approaching the topic, my own way of thinking about this, goes further than what the technology can offer at the moment. And I think that does not only go for you as an individual, but also for entire disciplines. But the dialogue itself, the kind of training, and this is important also for what we should model for our students, train the AI in prompt crafting that interrogates back. What are your assumptions? What is the learning journey that you are on? And you can, even in the way you set up your profile, you can say, I don't want ready-made output. Don't give me ready-made output. Give me more questions that interrogate my learning journey. That is not sufficiently on people's radar. I think I answered and half answered your question, but yeah.
That's really useful.
Yeah, and I think we need to do more of that work. To use it to prompt us back, to prompt us into deeper thinking, into deeper reflection. Not enough of that is happening at the moment.
Thank you. If I can put on the librarian hat,
Yeah.
because we are on this great ocean of AI, you know, and all of Tina's literary classics start or stop somewhere on an ocean. So I'm very well aware of this. There is already way too much. And the skills that students bring to interpret, so your framework, right, and then many other frameworks as well, and the workflow, and the care, the Ubuntu you speak of starts with the self. So when I get asked by a student, please can I have everything on, my heart sinks, because everything may be technically possible, but one small head can't hold all that. So we have a methodological issue coming into being here. But then we also have AI, which is baby steps right now. So I spent part of this afternoon on a purely academic AI engine. right, only operating inside the academic domain, it's coming at a premium price. Okay, there's 5 or 6 of those now. I mean, wait and see. But we will still be asking the question. So the prompt and the values that people bring to the prompting are absolutely essential, and your framework approach is brilliant.
Thank you. And I also think that AI literacy, critical AI literacy, critical in the sense that I'm advocating for, will become something that our kids will learn like they learn math and like they learn reading and writing. And the sooner, the better, I think. It's just me. Thank you.
May I just ask, actually, just before? Yeah, no, I don't want to. Just, I'm just standing here with the mic. So, I guess going back to this point that Tina made, this kind of interrogatory ability of AI, and your, obviously, the answer to this would then be for AI itself to take on this more critical role, and it itself, the engine itself, would be critical. Do you think at this point in time we've reached kind of a development in AI that it can be that interrogatory, or are we not there yet necessarily?
The onus is on us. Give you a very simple way of doing this. If you go to the Harvard Graduate School website, you find something called the Thinking Toolkit. Now, and this is about teaching students thinking routines. Now, you could, of course, ask yourself, how come that the Harvard Graduate School needs to teach its students thinking routines? But let's not go there tonight. Okay? Honestly, I invite you to do this. And they are super helpful, basic, up to advanced thinking routines across the curriculum. They're not necessarily subject specific, some of them are subject specific. You can run this against the GPT. And you can then, in that way, you yourself as an individual learner, train the GPT to take you systematically through these thinking routines, independent of what your subject area is. And we can do this now. We don't need to wait for any company to invent this for us. This is something we can do in our critical engagement with the technology. Yeah.
Sorry, one mic first. Sorry, and I found what you said very useful and very empowering in certain respects, but I can't prevent myself from just asking at this point whether, if I'm Sam Altman listening to you, what I'm hearing is somebody laying out a very, very, well-meaning and ethically informed project of training my private property to be an even more complete, if you like, product. There is a horizon of perfectibility that's still built into your model for the AI tool, which stands distinct from the human beings that we are, the subjects of the humanities, and which it seems to me isn't yet fully acknowledged or thought out in what you're proposing. So by all means, we engage more ethically, we prompt more ethically, we feed more nuanced and careful points of view and utterances into the machine, and yet the machine is getting all of this. The machine is being trained, the entity is being perfected. How do you answer the slightly unfair, in a sense, rejoinder that there is a more radical, if you like, position that comes from the humanities perspective, and it's what makes humanities dangerous to this current dispensation, and therefore maybe explains why we're under so much pressure, is that to take the remit of the humanities fully seriously, we, in a sense, have to claim our own power back and refuse to train the machine.
I have to think about that, because what I was trying to communicate is that in that way we can influence how it gets trained and what it gets trained with.
But what
That it
appears to
does
be...
get trained is something we cannot avoid. And unless we, whenever it is appropriate, if you remember what I said about informed opting out, that we work with frameworks that also make explicitly hold space for skepticism, for insight, for refusal, for all these other human reactions to it. But most importantly, I think it is that our disciplines here, that can make a difference in terms of how the engine gets fed. And then, of course, hopefully also what comes out at the other end, and how we interrogate, and how we work what comes out at the other end.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I think, and maybe this is a second line or a second order of humanistic engagement with the problem and the horizon, is to say that this cannot be separated from a real-world discussion about ownership and control and the political affiliations and the very, let's call it, unsophisticated power agendas of those who hold the actual reins of these technologies.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. However, I think that is not an AI-specific challenge. That goes with all educational technologies and all other technologies that we are using as well. It's maybe
Agreed,
more,
yeah.
it's maybe more acute at the moment. It's more at the center of our attention.
It's more potentially world-ending, it seems to me, especially for our... No.
I cannot make sure that this is redirected. I mean, it's not an AI-specific issue. What we say about appropriation of technology and where it is leaving us while we are leaving it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sorry.
One last question here, Marta.
Well, completely different question. You mentioned about kids in schools, so my question is more like about this AI literacy or critical AI literacy in teacher education, and how important you see the role of this in teacher education.
I try to hint at it a little bit. You know, we are doing a lot of work in collaborative online international learning and in virtual exchange, where we bring critical thinkers together, pre-service teachers, very popular virtual pre-service teacher education. In my work now, I embed AI literacy skills development exactly into that. How can we use the fact that we are by default a technology-mediated environment when we teach and learn online? How can we use that setting to teach AI literacy, critical AI literacy? So, on top of the task-based approaches and everything that we've been doing so far, the tools that they choose, that they evaluate, let them be AI applications, that the critical evaluation of these AI applications that they use in their collaborative work, that they become one of the foci of what we do in research teacher training. So that they then, when they go into the classrooms, can do the same thing with more awareness. Does it address the issue? I think, like we used to argue that virtual exchange, collaborative online international learning, online learning and teaching is an ideal way to teach digital literacy. Yeah? Similarly, it's an ideal setting to teach critical AI literacy. It's just a follow-on, it's the next step in what we do. And we add inserts to teacher education so that they can then hold the phone in the classroom. Across the age range, usually.
I should say that was the last question, but I see that the mic goes to you to mention.
Well, it just ended up in my hand actually, but I'll go for it. I was wondering, could you just elaborate, just maybe even just for me, what it would mean to teach people how to be AI literate? Because you know, from my perspective, it would, I would imagine, however well-intentioned it might sound, you can't really control how individuals or students, or especially, you know, younger students and so on, are going to use these technologies in their own free time, you know. It would be like, you know, teachers in school trying to teach students how to use social media responsibly.
It's not AI